Somewhere along the bayous of Louisiana, in a parish whose exact location has been deliberately obscured from historical records, there exists a documented account that challenges everything we understand about survival and the boundaries between human and animal nature. Court documents from the middle of the last century reference an incident involving 8 hunting dogs, a locked cellar, and a young woman who emerged after 3 days not as a victim, but as something the local magistrate described only as possessing an authority I cannot explain and dare not question. The plantation where this occurred was burned to the ground within a week of the incident. Its ashes were scattered, its records destroyed. Yet 3 separate letters from neighboring estate owners, now housed in a private collection, describe the same impossible scene. A girl of no more than 19 years, walking calmly through the main gates at dawn, 8 massive hunting dogs following in perfect formation behind her, their eyes fixed on her back with what one witness called the devotion of disciples. The Baroness who owned both the girl and the dogs was found dead in her chambers that same morning, though the cause was officially recorded as heart failure. What happened in that cellar was never officially investigated, never publicly discussed, and deliberately erased from parish records. Until now, the full account has remained buried in fragments across Louisiana's forgotten archives. If this introduction alone has sent a chill down your spine, know that stories like this, stories that blur the line between documented history and inexplicable events, are what we bring you. Now, let's discover what really happened in that cellar and why the truth was worth destroying every record of its existence. The events that would forever stain the Devo name began not with the girl or the dogs, but with the arrival of a widow to Louisiana's sugar country. Landry Parish in that era existed as a patchwork of old French colonial pride and new American ambition, where the rhythms of sugarcane cultivation dictated everything from marriage prospects to social standing. The parish stretched across fertile lowlands where cypress swamps gave way to endless rows of cane, and the air hung perpetually thick with moisture that made wool clothes cling and tempers flare. This was Acadian country, where French remained the language of choice among established families, where Catholic saints watched from every mantelpiece, and where the old ways, the brutal mathematics of plantation economics, went largely unquestioned by those who profited from them. The real power in St. Landry lived on the estates that spread like kingdoms across the surrounding countryside. Each one a world unto itself, governed by whoever held the deed. The Devo estate sat some miles northwest of town, accessible only by a shell road that became impassable in heavy rain. Baroness Eloise Devo arrived in Louisiana traveling from Charleston with a retinue of servants, several trunks of European furnishings, and a reputation that had preceded her by several months. She was widowed to a minor Belgian noble, whose death, rumors suggested, had been financially convenient for the Baroness. She was perhaps 40 years old, though she dressed younger. What struck people about the Baroness wasn't her appearance, but her eyes. They carried a calculating quality, a coldness that seemed to assess the monetary value of everything they landed upon. Within weeks of her arrival, she dismissed half the estate's workers, replaced the overseer with a man named Gaspard Thibodeau who'd been fired from 3 previous positions for excessive cruelty, and instituted a system of discipline that made neighboring planters, men hardly known for gentleness, exchange uncomfortable glances. The Baroness had brought with her from Charleston 8 hunting dogs, massive beasts bred from mastiffs and bloodhounds, each standing nearly 3 feet at the shoulder. She'd had them trained, she informed the local gentry, by a man in South Carolina who specialized in dogs of intimidation. They were never to be pets. They were tools, instruments of control, bred and conditioned to respond to fear, to dominate through size and the constant implicit threat of violence. She kept them in a specially constructed kennel behind the main house, fed them on a precise schedule designed to keep them perpetually hungry, perpetually alert, perpetually dangerous. The Baroness named each dog after a European noble house. She found it amusing, she told her guests, to have aristocratic bloodlines serving her will. The dogs responded only to her commands, spoken in sharp German. To everyone else, including Thibodeau, they showed teeth. In the fall of that year, the Baroness purchased a girl at the New Orleans slave market. The transaction was documented in a ledger that still exists, though the girl's name was recorded only as female, age estimated 16, from Virginia estate sale. The broker's notes written in the margins described her as uncommonly defiant for her age. Previous owner reported incidents of disobedience. Reduced price reflects difficult temperament. The Baroness paid a significant discount from market rate and had the girl transported in chains. The girl received the name Marguerite on the plantation. Though this wasn't the name she'd carried from Virginia, the Baroness chose it because it sounded civilized, because it was easy to call out, because the girl's actual name, her mother's name, was none of the Baroness's concern. Marguerite stood with the kind of slender build that came from growth interrupted by insufficient food. What made Marguerite different, what had likely caused her problems in Virginia, was her eyes. They didn't drop when addressed. They didn't show the fear that planters expected and required. They watched. They calculated. They held an intelligence that made overseers uncomfortable. The Baroness saw this quality immediately and found it entertaining. Here was something to break, something that would make the breaking satisfying. Over the following months, a pattern emerged. The Baroness would assign impossible tasks, then punish Marguerite for failing to complete them. She would plant items in Marguerite's quarters, then accuse her of theft. She would change instructions after giving them, then rage at the girl's incompetence. But Marguerite didn't break. She bent. She endured. But something in her remained rigid, untouched. The Baroness could see it in those eyes, still watching, still containing something that refused to be extinguished. It became an obsession. Then came the incident with the silver. It dawned humid and gray, the kind of spring morning where the air felt like breathing through damp cloth. Marguerite rose before dawn as always and began her morning duties. While polishing silver in the dining room, she heard the Baroness's bedroom door open earlier than usual. The Baroness appeared in the doorway, still in her dressing gown, her face twisted. "Where is it?" Her voice was quiet, controlled. "My bracelet, the gold bracelet with sapphires. It was on my nightstand last night. This morning, it's gone." She accused Marguerite, who had been in her chambers the previous day. Marguerite denied it. The Baroness had her quarters searched. The bracelet wasn't there. The Baroness called for Thibodeau. "Take her to the yard. 20 lashes for theft." But as Marguerite stood there, the Baroness's expression shifted to something more thoughtful, more frightening. "Actually, no, I have something better in mind. Thibodeau, take her to the cellars. Lock her in the lower room. The room under the kennels, ma'am. Yes, until I decide she's learned proper respect. A day, perhaps 2. Let her think about her theft in the dark. Let her listen to the dogs above her and contemplate what happens to thieves on my estate." They took Marguerite across the grounds to the kennel building. The animals started barking, a thunderous cacophony. Thibodeau led her to a trap door in the floor. Down you go. The smell that rose from below, earth, old wood, and something animal and sour, made her stomach turn. She climbed down a wooden ladder into complete darkness. The trap door slammed shut above her, followed by the click of a padlock. The cellar was exactly as described, a small square of packed earth and rough cypress walls. The only light bled through cracks in the floorboards above. A wooden bucket sat in one corner. Nothing else. Marguerite sat with her back against a wall. She could hear the dogs above, their breathing, their movements, the scrape of claws on wood. She'd been in worse places before. She could endure a day, maybe 2. The Baroness would eventually grow bored. What Marguerite couldn't know, was that the Baroness had no intention of letting her out in a day or 2. The first day passed in a fog of discomfort. Thibodeau brought water at dawn and dusk, lowering a cup on a string without a word. The dogs learned to ignore her presence below. Marguerite dozed when she could, her mind deliberately empty, preserving her strength. She marked time by the water visits, by the cycles of the dogs settling and stirring. On the second day, the routine changed. Thibodeau brought water only once. The dogs became more restless. Their barks were sharper, more frequent. Marguerite's hunger became a sharp, persistent ache. The damp cold of the earth seeped into her bones. She paced the small space to keep warm, counting her steps. 8 paces one way, 8 paces back. On the third morning, no water came. The dogs were silent for a long time, then began a low, collective whining that raised the hair on her arms. Then she heard it, the trap door being unlocked. But it wasn't Thibodeau's boots on the ladder. It was the Baroness. She descended slowly, a lamp in one hand. In the flickering light, her face was a mask of cold curiosity. She set the lamp on the dirt floor. The dogs above were now frantic, throwing themselves against their gates. You've had time to consider your theft, the Baroness said. Her voice was calm, almost conversational. I find I am not yet satisfied with your remorse. Marguerite said nothing. She kept her eyes on the Baroness's hands. You have a spirit, girl. A stubbornness. I mean to see it broken. Completely. The Baroness took a step closer. I think another day down here will suffice. Perhaps without the bucket. Then the Baroness did something Marguerite did not expect. She looked up at the ceiling, at the sounds of the frantic dogs, and smiled. They're hungry too, you know. I've been experimenting with their feeding. They're learning new associations, new triggers for their aggression. The Baroness turned back to Marguerite, her eyes gleaming in the lamplight. I wonder what they would associate you with, after so long listening to you down here. The source of their hunger, perhaps. It was then Marguerite understood. This was not a punishment. It was a preparation. The Baroness climbed back up the ladder. But she did not close the trap door. Instead, she stood at the opening, looking down. Then she whistled, a sharp, commanding sound in German. And she opened the gates. The sound was instantaneous. 8 heavy bodies hitting the floor above, claws scrambling, a chorus of deep, eager barks. The Baroness looked at Marguerite one last time. Let's see what remains of that spirit by morning. She slammed the trap door shut. But she did not lock it. Marguerite stood frozen in the dark. She heard the Baroness walk away. She heard the kennel door close. And then she heard the dogs. They were circling the trap door now, sniffing, scratching. They could smell her. They could hear her breathing. The flimsy wooden door was the only thing between her and them. Time lost all meaning. The dogs did not settle. They paced. They whined. They threw their weight against the trap door. The wood groaned. Dust and dirt sifted down with every impact. Marguerite retreated to the farthest corner, her heart hammering against her ribs. She searched the darkness for anything, a loose board, a tool, a weapon. There was nothing but earth and the wooden bucket. The first board splintered near dawn. A long crack appeared, and a muzzle forced its way through, snuffling, dripping saliva. The dog, Bourbon, let out a wet, eager bark. The others went into a frenzy. Marguerite knew then she would not be saved. No one was coming. This was the Baroness's design. To be found later, torn apart by her own animals, a final lesson, a final assertion of absolute power. But something in Marguerite, that untouched, rigid core, did not agree. A cold clarity washed over her, burning away the fear, the hunger, the exhaustion. She looked at the bucket. She looked at the snarling muzzle working to widen the hole in the door. She looked at her own hands. When the dogs finally broke through, it was not a flood. It was one at a time. Bourbon, the largest, forced his way down, landing heavily in the dirt. He stood between her and the ladder, his head low, a deep growl rumbling in his chest. The other dogs barked and fought at the opening above. Marguerite did not cower. She stood slowly, her eyes meeting the dogs. She did not see an instrument of the Baroness. She saw an animal, hungry, trained to fear and to cause fear. But an animal. She remembered something from a lifetime ago, from before Virginia, a faint memory of a grandfather who worked with hounds. He'd spoken of a language beneath the barking and the growling. A language of stillness, of breath, of unblinking eyes. Bourbon lunged. Marguerite did not run. She did not raise her hands to defend herself. She dropped, not away, but toward, rolling under his leap, coming up behind him as he crashed into the wall. She was on her feet in an instant, turning to face him. He turned, confused, angered. He charged again. This time, Marguerite let out a sound, not a scream, but a sharp, guttural cry that stopped him mid-stride. It was a sound of pure command, born not of training, but of a will to survive that was older than plantations, older than masters and slaves. It was the sound of a creature refusing to be prey. The dog hesitated, his ears flicked, his growl wavered. Above, the other dogs fell silent, listening. Marguerite took a slow step forward, her eyes locked on his. She breathed in slowly, out slowly, making herself calm, making herself large in the small space. She pointed to the ground before her. She did not speak a word. The dog, Bourbon, stared. The training warred with something else, an instinct that recognized a different kind of authority. Not the sharp German commands that promised food for obedience and pain for failure, but something absolute, primordial. Slowly, his tail lowered. Then, he lay down. The rest happened in a strange, silent dream. One by one, the other dogs came down the ladder. Habsburg, Savoy, Hohenzollern, each entered snarling, each met Marguerite's unflinching gaze and the new, palpable authority that filled the cellar, an authority forged in 3 days of darkness and the certain promise of death. One by one, they submitted. They lay down in a circle around her. For hours, they remained there in the dark. The girl and the 8 dogs. She shared the last of the stale water from the bucket with them. They did not fight. They waited. When the first gray light of the third dawn filtered through the broken trap door, Marguerite stood. She brushed the dirt from her dress. She walked to the ladder. The dogs stood with her. She climbed. They followed, orderly, silent. She pushed open the trap door and emerged into the kennel. She walked past the empty pens, out into the cool morning air. The dogs fell into formation behind her, a silent guard. She walked past the main house, past the quarters where the other enslaved people watched, stunned, from doorways. She walked straight to the main gates, unlatched them, and stepped through onto the shell road. She did not look back at the plantation. She walked calmly down the road toward the rising sun, the 8 massive hunting dogs moving as one at her heels, their eyes fixed on her back with the devotion of disciples. Back at the house, the Baroness was found in her chambers. The doctor called it heart failure. The estate was sold. The new owners, unsettled by the stories, burned the kennel and the main house to the ground within the week. The ashes were scattered. The records were destroyed. The magistrate who took the initial report wrote that the girl possessed an authority he could not explain and dared not question. He recommended the matter be closed, forgotten. Marguerite was never seen in St. Landry parish again, but in fragments of letters and diaries from neighboring estates, mentions persist of a young woman walking north along the river roads, followed always by a pack of large, silent dogs. Some say she crossed into Texas. Others say she disappeared into the swamps, becoming part of the local lore, a spirit of defiance that the land itself remembered. What happened in that cellar was more than survival. It was a transformation. In the absolute dark, faced with instruments of terror, Marguerite did not become what they were meant to make her. She did not become prey. She reached back for something older, something that speaks in the silence before language, in the glance that establishes dominion. She remembered the first law, that to command a beast, you must first become something more than human, or something essentially human stripped of all pretense. She became, for those 72 hours, not a slave, not a victim, but the Alpha. And when she emerged, the world the Baroness had built